All right, Nico, can you say, welcome to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies?
It's a happy episode. Happy babies.
Welcome back to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies. I'm Dr. Jay Warren. I'm the prenatal and pediatric chiropractor here at the Cap Wellness Center. And this podcast is all about helping you have a proactively healthy pregnancy so you can have a safe, gentle, natural birth. And that's going to allow you to bring your baby into the world that much more gently and healthily so you can start off your family experience more powerfully than if it's full of stress and trauma and other health concerns. So if you are a fan of this show and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Wherever you listen to your podcast, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an upcoming episode. And also, if you haven't rated or reviewed the podcast and you've enjoyed it and gotten value of it, that will really help me out because that'll allow this podcast to reach more and more parents like yourself that might be missing out on this type of information and helping them along their parenting journey. So thank you in advance for that. And thank you if you already have rated and reviewed. And today's guest is Marcy Axness. She is the author of a fantastic book called Parenting for Peace. And she's an early development specialist whose work I've gotten to know through APA. She's another guest that I've brought on the podcast because of what I've learned through the Association of Pre- and Perinatal Psychology. Her work in early childhood development really speaks to that part of us as parents that really wants to raise our kids in the best way possible. And she talks about the concept around how to find that calm, loving leader inside you as a parent. And even more importantly, tools to be able to allow us to find that part of us inside. And a concept we'll talk about as well is, how to be an authority as a parent rather than an authoritarian, right? So being an authority, a leader, rather than doing it the my way or the highway, which sometimes in the frustration of being a parent is so easy to default into. So she's here to share that message with us, gives us lots of tools on how we can do more of that as we're raising our kids. So before I switch over to our conversation, though, let me take a quick break and a quick message, and then we'll be right back. Hi, it's Dr. J, and I am so excited to announce to you that my new online program is now available. It's called Connecting with Baby During Pregnancy, and what it's going to do is going to teach you methods proven by the latest research in pre- and perinatal psychology and epigenetics that are going to allow you to have not only a calmer and more relaxed pregnancy and to have a gentler, more natural birth, but on the other side of things, you're going to feel more confident as a mom, and you're going to be able to soothe your baby that much easier, because when you're able to bond with baby and connect right now during your pregnancy, it's only going to translate on the other side to just being that much more connected and be able to help them calm and soothe. It's a really important thing. So head on over to drj.warren.com/CWB, that's Connecting with Baby, and you can learn all about it. Dr. Marcy Axness is an early childhood development specialist, a popular international speaker, and the author of Parenting for Peace, Raising the Next Generation of Peacemakers. She is a top blogger at mothering.com and is featured in several documentary films as an expert in adoption, prenatal development, and Waldorf education. Dr. Axness has a private practice coaching parents in progress and considers as one of her most important credentials that she's raised 2 peacemakers of her own to share with the world, her children Ian and Eve, who are now in their 20s. So now let me switch over to my conversation with Dr. Marcy Axness. All right, Marcy, welcome to the podcast.
Jay, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're here to talk about what we're going to be talking about today, which is when we were going over all the myriad of things that we could have done on this podcast. There's so much that you know about, that you're an expert in, that you're passionate about, that we could have gone, and maybe we'll pursue those in others. But the whole when we were talking, your concept of finding that calm, loving leader inside each one of us as parents. Right away when you said that, I was like, "Ooh, okay, I need that as a parent." So I'm sure the listeners need that too. And so, I want you to tell us more about what that is, but at the same time, like the way that we were connected was through APA, through your work is a lot of required study in our program, and your book, Parenting for Peace, I think is just a really special work. And I want you to share along the lines of this more rather than just birth-oriented or pregnancy-oriented. It all starts there, obviously, but how we can find that calm, loving leader. I think that concept is just so important.
Sure, yeah, happy to. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. And you're right, it is a challenge when my book is such a broad sweep. And I will say that Parenting for Peace as a book can be very daunting for parents. It's a fat book. I'm lucky it even got published because fat parenting books are really not what people want. They want something slim and successful that's going to help them real quick. And I just want to point out that it's really not meant to be a cover-to-cover read. Ideally, it's meant to be a companion for 15 or 20 years that you start reading long before you conceive and, takes you up through your child's adolescence and beyond. So, and the other piece about it that I want to say regarding the broad overarching idea of the book as you introduced it. This is a premise of our biology. We're not trying to re-engineer or reverse engineer anything here. What we're wanting to do, and what the whole book is about, is working with biology and bringing biology on our side. We are designed to evolve. We're designed to become happier, more intelligent, more peaceful. And so Parenting for Peace, it offers a scientific roadmap for how you can be part of this evolution solution of raising a generation of peacemakers beginning long before you have children. That said, I'll just share a little personal glimpse of one of the things that was really a big driver of my explorations in all of this. And it has to do with when I was a new mom of I think he was probably a toddler at this point. He might have even just been an infant, my first child, my son Ian. And I found myself in the bathroom whipping a hand towel against the against the counter in sheer frustration, just whipping. It made this, I remember thinking it makes a satisfying crack like bone. I mean, it was really pretty dark. It was probably pretty dark. I mean, it was just to drain off enough of what I found out later was true rage, so that I could just sit on the floor with my baby and his blocks. And, behind my shiny J. Crew organic baby food exterior, I was really struggling. And I was determined to find out why. And what I discovered over time is that when we hold a baby in our arms, the baby we were is right there too, along with whatever unresolved hurts or unmet needs that we might have had. And the same is true of the toddler, the preschooler, the school-age child, the teenager. We all live with an entourage, which is us at each age we ever were. And so it can get a little bit crowded and loud in there. You know what I'm saying?
I do. I know as a parent, there are certain times where I feel like the toddler, the way that I'm like behaving towards my own toddler. Well, he's a preschooler now, but there is that thing of like, who's this parent coming out, and I judge myself and have these struggles, and I'm able to calm myself down afterwards, or just even projecting onto my kiddo things that really aren't his experience. I'm coming to understand it was mine.
Jay, that is so wise of you to notice that. That is another wrinkle of this that I wasn't really even going to get get into, and I only talk about actually in my 5 tools course. But that is one of these pitfalls is to project what your infant or toddler experience was onto your child and then respond to that instead of what's showing up in them in real time in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's brilliant of you to even bring that up. I'm so glad you mentioned it.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, listen, what I discovered along the way is the exciting news from neuroscience and everything they have to share with us is that even if you had the worst childhood, and I had a very complicated everything as an adopted person, not just the fact that I was separated from my mother at birth and, and given to completely unrelated people to be raised, but then there were whole other issues and we won't even go down that road. But the point is, even if you have the worst childhood, it doesn't necessarily have to have a negative impact on your kids. And the reason why is that we've discovered that by connecting more deeply with our own inner lives, we lay the healthiest foundation for our children's development. And our self-awareness, what you just described getting to in those incidents with your 3 toddlers, you, your inner toddler, and your real toddler.
Right.
That self-awareness actually helps to shape the optimal wiring of your child's social brain and future success. And that's really how we parent for peace. So that takeaway is work on yourself and your child will thrive. And we can talk about more specifics of that for sure as we go on. And the other piece of it is, and you've maybe even experienced this, those of us who have had less than ideal experiences of being parented find that in raising children, we have many opportunities for healing our own past. And that is, again, intimately entwined with your own child's future. And so this, again, is about the role that each of us plays in evolving our species forward, our human family, given what science knows about the influence we have over our own selves, our own destinies. This is Pierre Bruce Lipton, who I know you had on recently.
Yes, and it's something that I think all parents are happy to hear, that we're not destined to just recreate our own poor environment. And, even if there's a great environment that they were raised in, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to pass that on, because we all, we're all ever evolving, and it's whether that's physical or emotional. Right. And I think that most of the kiddos, that are, around us, meaning specifically our own children, but then also as it ever widens into the friends that are coming in, and like there's a different set of parents doing different sets of things with their kids, and now that kid's interacting with mine, and is that good? Is it bad? There's a lot of complications there. And I mean, I see with all of the parents that I work with, like just any movement towards peace in any way is helpful.
Right.
And so I think that starts with your own self, and then it's within the family, and then it can trickle out elsewhere. And that's totally the message of your book. I don't have to tell you that, but that's why I want to bring you on, so that you can help trickle that out to all the families that are listening.
Right. I also just want to respond with a bit of clarification about what you said in terms of, yes, it does. I don't know that I would use the word complicated as more and more what you might call role models or, adult models become part of the child's constellation. I just want to really reiterate and clarify that you as parents will always be the primary examples as long as you, maintain that healthy attachment. I mean, healthy attachment between a child and parents is one of the most protective factors going, and right up into their tween and teen years, which that's kind of a whole other topic, and maybe we should do another talk about that some other time, about how, we tend to sort of drop our teens and our tweens because they seem so old and capable, but that's actually developmentally one of the most tender times there is, and when they really need that attachment. But just to reassure you that no matter what they're exposed to, quote unquote, out there, you will always prevail as the primary model and example.
Yeah, I think that's important to hear as a parent because we're sometimes afraid of those external exposures. But I mean, especially in like baby world and toddler world, like we'll see that, if we've created a safe space and the kiddos safe or feel secure enough to go explore, they're going to come to a point where they are beyond their comfort zone, whether that's a physical comfort zone or an emotional one, and they'll turn to us for reference of, am I okay? And
right.
part of our job is to, one, create that space and then hopefully reassure them of like, yes, you're okay, go explore, and allow them to do so. But then later on down the line, no matter what happens, say at school or on the playground or whatever, if we have a great attachment and a great relationship with our kids that we've developed, then they have a safe place to come back and get reference of what just happened here, and allow them to formulate their own way, navigate their own way through it. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, what you just said is wonderful and right on, and is sidles alongside what I said. But it also is a perfect time to mention this really fascinating research. I mean, what we were talking about, how our own unresolved childhood stuff tends to come up and be right there. When your toddler's having a tantrum, it's not just the two of you, it's the three of you, your own outer child, yourself, and then your own inner toddler. And, we can get into some real practical ways of dealing with that in the moment, because you referred to that yourself. But there's fascinating, this type of stuff typically tends to really start rearing its head. But this pitfall that I see as one of the biggest pitfalls in parenting, it tends to start rearing up in adulthood. And there's fascinating research in the field of attachment that is showing that up until about 10 to 12 months of age is the so-called honeymoon period. Where it's all rainbows and unicorns and goo-goo eyes and cuddling. And yes, there can be some sleep issues, and that can be its own separate issue. But once a child gets into toddlerhood, once that child is mobile and stands up and starts toddling towards like Aunt Rose's precious lamp or whatever, the honeymoon is over, and they get what the researchers called a stern inhibiting directive every 9 minutes. And then they've gone on and they've researched the effects in terms of cortisol raising and the stress effects of that kind of stern inhibiting directive. And it's pretty extreme. Joseph Chilton Pierce talked about this a lot. And so you mentioned, in abiding as parents as that safe place, that safe refueling, reconnecting space always. And this is a time where that can really become a little eroded, and the child's trust in us can be eroded. And we want to keep in mind that the big picture is always that we're looking to foster a child's most vibrant, flourishing brain development, particularly the structures that mediate social intelligence. And one of the biggest ways to thwart that development is through stress. Now, stress is a very vague word. I mean, what is stress to a kid? Number one, I believe, is to feel not connected to their loving leader, who ideally is a parent, which we got to get into this talking about calm, loving authority. But a tool that parents I work with find really helpful, a way to make the question of stress very tangible rather than so abstract, is what I call the growth or protection regulator. It's one of my 5 tools. I have a whole 5 tools program. And by that, this is what I mean. Growth or protection, it functions as sort of a binary filter. So it's pretty easy to keep in mind. And the question is, will this comment, will this intervention, will this thing I'm about to do or say with my child foster his or her sense of being able to feel growth and safe and just keep growing, or is it going to make them feel the need to protect? Now, growth or protection is what I call the mainspring of Parenting for Peace. It drives everything. And I was first taught about this across the restaurant table, literally on the back of a napkin, by the aforementioned Bruce Lipton.
Yes.
And if I always, I try to put this into almost every interview I do, because if you as a listener remember just one thing I say, make this the one thing, because it informs every moment of your existence, and even more so of your child's and of their development and well-being. And here it is. And I hope I'm not duplicating what what Bruce said with you recently. But at every moment, we are either in growth mode or in protection mode, right down to ourselves. Ourselves, those like infinitely small units of intelligence that Bruce is so familiar with. We as organisms are continually checking in with our environment and asking, right down to the level of the cell, are conditions safe and secure so I can grow into my fullest potential, or are conditions threatening and insecure so that I must devote my energies to protecting myself? And I've had parents who, even when they feel completely against the wall and sort of like blank in their brain about how do I respond in this moment to my child, that they are able to remember what's going to create a sense of safety so that my child can be in growth mode, and so that I too as a parent can be in growth mode.
Right. That's a good point too. Like us.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We're on that continuum
because children pick up on our calm and they pick up on our uncalm. And so, of course, one of my main interventions for a tantrum is, number one, breathe and find your own center. It's really hard. I mean, most of what I teach is very simple. It's not always very easy.
Right. Well, and finding your own calm within the storm is like a skill for all of life, but certainly in the middle of a tantrum.
Well, exactly. And as we get into the loving leader stuff, which I'd love to get into now, that's one of the reasons I start in the book, even in the first chapter, which is even before conception, and certainly around conception and then during the pregnancy, that this is time for parents to practice all these kinds of things. I've got all kinds of exercises and stuff in there for finding that loving leader and for tracing back maybe reasons why we might not be able to feel comfortable as a loving leader. That's why I love to work with parents before the child actually arrives.
Right.
Because then now you got to show up. Oops, what's that? Anyway, I mean, so here's the thing with young kids, and you were really wanting to sort of speak to parents with young kids, who've passed that honeymoon period, right?
Right. Yes.
So much of what I observe is I see parents experiencing life with young children as a series of battles and tactical maneuvers. Mm-hmm. Does that resonate?
Yeah. I mean, I feel that as a parent for sure, and I hear it obviously in my office.
It's trying to head off that next meltdown or that whatever. And it's not their fault. First of all, our culture seduces well-meaning parents into doing things that can really suck the joy and peace right out of family life.
Like what, for example?
Pardon?
Like what, for example?
Well, the acquisitiveness, just the material, just stuff. I mean, putting candy at the checkout aisle of every single store that ever existed in our country. What's that about?
Right.
But they, which kind of trickles down. I see I call it the big three challenges for parents. Too much information, too many choices, and not enough confidence. And that really, really, in a big meta way, does sum up the challenges. Getting down to what specific, practical kind of parenting pitfalls parents, are just, there's landmines all around them, is giving young children too many choices. That's rampant. It's an epidemic. Trying to be too democratic in the family, engaging in way too much negotiation and explanation and justification with young kids, and also using timeout, which we'll just pigeonhole. Probably none of your listeners even use timeout anymore. I'm getting the sort of the feedback that people don't use that anymore, so that's great. But see, each of these pitfalls can be addressed as parents cultivate their inner calm, loving authority figure, and to be that loving leader that the young child instinctively longs for. So helping parents find that inner confidence, their conviction, that sense of authority that sometimes they feel lacking in, that ends up being a huge part of the work I do with parents.
Right, and that's a distinction you made when we were chatting before scheduling the interview, is the difference between being the authority and an authoritarian. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. An authoritarian parenting is, it's my way or the highway. Do it just because I said so. Okay. And very often authoritarian parenting very often hides an actual lack of confidence or a lack of skill, a lack of awareness. I mean, it covers up a lot of stuff. It's a very armored and unproductive way of parenting because it certainly undermines trust. It undermines intimacy. And trust and intimacy are two of the things that you as a parent are really, think of it as a trust fund or a growing fund of some sort that you are wanting to continually make deposits into so that you're going to be able to start drawing on it as your child becomes more independent and starts moving away from you in the teen years. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So authoritative parenting is, well, here's the thing. I tell parents, and this is so un-PC, Jay, I will say. Parenting the young child, and when I talk about the young child, I'm talking up till about the age of 6 or 7, when there is a major shift in the brain functioning of the child. Okay, we as a culture, we tend to make a huge mistake of thinking of the small child as a tiny miniature adult, and it could not be further from the truth. So parenting a young child does resemble dog training in some ways. And I tell parents, if you get Cesar Millan, then you've got 90% of the territory covered.
I'm watching that right now because we just got a puppy a couple months ago, and I can see the similarities between dog training and kiddo training. Yeah. All
right. Well, then here it is. He doesn't ever advocate cruelty or, either physical or emotional. It's that pack leader thing, okay? With dogs, with horses, they need to know that you're in control, that you totally know what you're doing, and that you're confident in what's supposed to happen. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with young children.
Right.
And this is why, those first two pitfalls I just mentioned undermines this sense. Okay, giving young children too many choices and trying to be too democratic, and, checking in with them about everything. Should we go to the park now or should we go to the baba? I mean, I know I don't have to tell you this. You hear it all the time.
Yeah.
You might even do it.
I totally do it. There's plenty of times where I do that.
Right. Well, this is a misunderstanding of the young child's brain. And and like many parenting missteps, I don't even want to call it a mistake, but missteps. It errs not in its intention. We want to involve the child in that. We don't want to feel like, we're dictators, but the fact is we are benevolent dictators. Okay, but we want the child to have, feel some sense of, some autonomy over their daily life, right? So it doesn't err in its intention. It errs in its timing. Bringing the child much more into family decisions is much more appropriate once they're in school age. Okay. But up until age 7, I have the choices rule that I adapted the old birthday. Do you remember the old rule of thumb for how many kids you invite to a child's birthday party?
No. It's everyone that the kids ever seen,
Nobody
right?
pays attention to it.
No, what is it?
Yeah. Well, the old rule of thumb was the age of the child plus 1. So if your child's turning 4, you would invite 5 guests.
Oops, we missed that one. Nico turned 4 a couple weeks ago. We had a free-for-all.
Yeah, okay. So, all of this is part about, this is all part of what, a phrase that has really fallen out of favor, I think, and isn't used much anymore, but it's developmentally appropriate practice. Mm-hmm. It's making choices and shaping circumstances that respect your child's capabilities and your child's sensibilities. a young child, and too much incoming stimuli, including too many people, it's just not always a setup for success, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
So I adapted that for choice. Same thing for choices. So, the 3-year-old would get 4 choices in the course of a day. And I'm not talking about open-ended. I'm talking about, do you want to wear the green pants or the blue pants?
Right.
Do you want strawberries or bananas on your cereal? And I've seen parents give 4 choices in the course of a freaking half hour, and I am not exaggerating.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is, back to the growth or protection thing, what parents aren't realizing when they do that. They feel like they're empowering their child, but what they're doing is stressing them. Because at that age, remember Cesar Millan, the child wants to know that their parent knows what's supposed to happen without basically co-opting, looping them in to sign off on parenting decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense.
They start to get into this mode of like, who's driving this bus?
Right.
And this is where you end up with the quote unquote, she's a handful, or the little tyrant syndrome.
Yeah.
Because when a child, and there's a whole spectrum of tolerance that various children will have for these missteps. Children are so individual and they have different temperaments. And so for some kids, you might have a very narrow error tolerance around these issues. Whereas for others, they might still behave like little angels and follow you as a loving leader, even if you do give them 7 choices in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is, once they get a sense that my mom, my dad is not driving this bus, they are not the loving leader that I need, then, and this is completely bio-instinctive, Jay, they will realize they have to start controlling.
Mm.
And that's when you get the little tyrant, the, oh, he's such a handful kind of syndrome going on.
Because their circuits are fried because they're not capable of doing that job. Is that what you're saying?
Not only are they not capable of doing that job, that's the kind of a secondary reaction, but the first reaction is, oh crap, nobody's driving this bus. And that is instant protection mode.
Okay. So they're scared.
So, but it's scared but not in a way that they could ever tell you. See, that's what's so sad about it. You get these little tyrants who have no idea why. They don't want to be that way. Our children want more than anything for us to be that calm, loving authority that they can happily follow. The word discipline comes from the word disciple, joyful follower. So I'm just always inviting parents to become that loving leader that your child can take joy in following, and so many discipline issues will just evaporate.
Wow, that connected so many dots for me, because I know, like that example I used at the very beginning with like a little baby that's like crawling away, but they look back to us to see that they're secure. I don't know why I only like concepted it in that like smaller, like kind of physical realm. It is that same thing throughout all of child rearing, right? Of knowing like, all right, so they're in charge. Yes, I might not like my choice of like strawberries or bananas on my cereal, but they'll get over it. But there's this sense of security around that structure. Exactly.
Well, and structure. You just said. I mean, one of a parent's greatest, and my book is written. It's sort of a matrix. Okay, it's written across 7 steps in time, starting preconception and going up through adolescence, and then at each of those steps, there are 7 principles to be applied. And one of the principles is rhythm. And rhythm is one of an enlightened parent's greatest tools and secrets. The young child thrives on rhythm. They thrive on structure. They thrive on predictability, on knowing what comes next. For us adults, it can seem boring, but for them, that is Bruce Perry, one of my all-time idols in the world of attachment neurobiology, he's always teaching that when a child experiences predictability and regularity in their daily life, they wire up that predictability and regularity in their social brain.
Yeah, I'm just, I'm thinking too around like, well, one, rhythm and structure. It's another protection, so that they're not in protection mode, going back to your like growth and protection, that they can grow within that structure rather than them needing to spend their energies finding protection so they can get out of it once again. I don't know if that made any sense.
That made total sense. For that word, I like to use the word shelter. It creates a shelter within which they can. I mean, here's what I learned from my daughter's Waldorf kindergarten teacher. She said to me, when you talk to, that's another thing, one of the things I do with parents when they first come to me, typically with a young child, is I have them cut back by about 50% on the sheer number of words they're saying to their kid. I mean, and I'm not talking about the whole research of kids who don't get enough words said to them. That's a whole other socioeconomic subset that typically aren't coming into my practice. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the chattering and we're going to go to Aunt Nancy's, and remember, you love Aunt Nancy's, and all the justification and the explanation, and Patty McNulty, this wonderful, wonderful Waldorf kindergarten teacher, said to me, she goes, when we talk too much to the young child, it pisses them off. It pisses them off. And why? Again, another reason they don't recognize, just like giving too many choices, they don't recognize that this is scaring them. It's completely at an instinctive level. It's not lining up with their biological imperative. And this is what Parenting for Peace is all about, is how can we parent in a way that aligns with rather than fights against their biological imperative and the things that they're expecting by nature, by virtue of them being a little mammal. Okay? The reason it pisses them off, she says, is that the young child up until that age of 6 or 7, that age of reason, they are meant to be able to be living in a dreamy, the kingdom of childhood, in a dreamy space where they don't have to wake up so much. She says when you're talking to them and asking them questions all the time, it like wakes them out of it, and it kind of pisses them off, even though they have no idea why. Right. Does that make any sense?
It makes perfect sense, because I know there's definitely been times where we're trying to like prep Nico to like do something, and he definitely tunes us out or shuts it off. We think we're serving him by like prepping him for what's going on, but it seems like maybe it can be overwhelming to him.
Right, and so you always have to look at, why are you saying something to a child? It's very often it's to address a need in us, and and this is where that self-awareness piece really comes in. But it goes back to what you just said about having the shelter within which they can be in growth mode. And that's really what Patty said. If we can shelter childhood, they're free to just dreamily and almost like unconsciously walk through the world, unself-consciously. See, that's one of the other things that, at a more sort of esoteric spiritual level, that is a negative side effect of all of this intellectualizing with the young child. It brings a premature self-awareness to them when they're really not designed. They don't really even experience themselves as separate from the world around them, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It does.
So that's another reason. But I know we're running short on time, and I really want to give your listeners at least a couple handholds for like, oh, yes, I am experiencing my inner toddler or preschooler. What do I do?
Yes, please do. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll give you sort of a three-step thing, kind of in progressive level of, involvement or stuff you have to do. Number one is really easy, and it's really taps into what you gave as an example of yourself. Just noticing and sitting with that understanding. First just hearing me say it, if it never had occurred to you, if that blows your mind, just sit with that for a while. And maybe reflect back on some recent encounters with your child in which, like you did, you might have seen a reflection or an expression of your own self at that age, sort of in the conversation. So that's the first. And if you only ever do that, you're still gonna shift the consciousness. You're gonna shift the field. Everything happens in the field. as Joseph Chilton Pierce used to say, field effects are everything. So just that shift in consciousness is going to go a long way. If you want to, take the next step, and it's pretty easy and simple and low footprint, small footprint, just having a willingness to acknowledge, your own reawakened child with compassion. And when you told your story, you even noticed the lack of compassion. Mm-hmm. And it's challenging, especially if our original experience at that age wasn't necessarily met with compassion. So to just acknowledge that your reawakened child with compassion, just imaginally take his or her hand, reassure them that you're safe, we're going to do this together. One example is, I tell a long story in this, not long story, but a story about Ian's sudden refusal to do diaper changes without a tantrum. And I gave an example of the presence move. Presence is the number one principle of the book. The presence move that I would have done with myself had I had this awareness back then, of using empathy, of engaging empathy with my little toddler self who was right there and who was feeling pretty powerless and frustrated. And I would just take her by the hand and give her some loving empathy. I know this is really hard. Nobody really ever listened to you, so it's hard to feel like you can get him to listen to you now. Mm-hmm. Let's take a deep breath together, and we'll do this together.
Mm. That's sweet. That's really sweet.
It is sweet, and some of us need some sweetness, And then the third thing is look up Dan Siegel's book, Parenting from the Inside Out. Mm-hmm. It was written, Dan Siegel's one of the field leaders in the field of attachment neurobiology, and he saw the research coming out so vividly that the more connected a parent was with their own story of being parented, the better the attachment scores were. And for a long time, they didn't understand that result, and I won't go into all the science of why that is, but it is. And so he decided, I'm not going to keep my writing just to scholarly journals. I want to get this to parents. So he and Mary Hartzell, who ran a preschool in Santa Monica, they got together and they wrote this wonderful book, Parenting from the Inside Out. I do excerpts from it in my book. Then I also have a free gift if parents want to go to my website, which I know you'll have included in the notes down below.
Yes.
I have a free e-booklet that is a 7-step guide to helping your child release stuck behaviors. And you can use it's a way to talk to your child in their sleep, but you can also, interestingly enough, even though it's not in the protocol there, but you can use that with your own, reawakened child as well. And then I also developed out of this discovery of the importance of the calm, loving leader, developing that with my own clients in my own practice. I did finally go ahead and record some guided imagery work that I had been having such success with them. And that's called Calm Authority for Mothers. And there's a version for fathers, and that they can find on my website as well.
Well, I'll make sure
so,
all of those.
There's a lot of tools.
A lot of tools.
Yeah.
I mean, one, just our conversation, I think, will expand the thinking of the listeners. I hope that is. But then also to have these tools to be able to kind of put those concepts in action and implement to just make the family life that much more peaceful and much more enjoyable. I'll make sure, listeners, that all those links are there so you can just click onto them and get that. So in our last minutes here, Marcy, what's the major take-home message you'd like our listeners to leave today's conversation with?
Well,
you only get one, Marcy. Just kidding.
I only get one.
No, you shared a lot of wisdom, but what would you simmer things down to?
Well, I am going to pluck a little something out of my Calm Authority for Mothers and say that if you aren't feeling, the confidence, a lot of us grew up in parenting situations where maybe we didn't get the messages, those inner beliefs that I deserve to be listened to. My word has meaning, maybe we didn't develop that. And so developing that loving leadership is challenging. And if that's the case, then one thing that you can do, because it is very important that you cultivate that for your child and for yourself, is think of somebody who to you is the epitome of a calm, loving, authoritative parent. For me, funny enough, it was Blythe Danner.
No kidding.
You know, that's Gwyneth Paltrow's mother.
Yes. No, I remember her.
I just always saw her as just the beneficent, wonderful mother. And so you can just imagine an encounter you had with your child which didn't go maybe the way you'd like, and then you just do a replay and you imagine how would Blythe Danner, or whoever your your picture of your ideal is, and picture that really vividly and feel it in your being, in your bones, and feel the feelings that go along with that. And that's a way that you can practice this. And it really, mind-body science does bear this out. This really does help.
I love that. I love that. What about for the little kiddos? What words of wisdom would you like to whisper into their little ear?
Breathe and know that you are always safe and secure and loved.
That's beautiful too. Well, Marcy, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for sharing your wisdom and your time. I loved there were tons of other ideas. I'd love to have you back to have you share more if you'd like to.
Sure. Always happy to come back.
Great. Well, thank you, Marcy.
All right. You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information about this episode and other natural childbirth and parenting topics, please visit us at capwellnesscenter.com or message us on our Facebook page with any questions you might have. We here at the Cap Wellness Center look forward to helping you and your family be as happy and healthy as you can be.